TCI is brought to you by Spendthrift Farm Stallion Danza, dominant winner of the Grade 1 Arkansas Derby and placed in the Kentucky Derby. New for 2016.
Welcome back to TCI, your inside track to the Triple Crown. Alongside Joel Cunningham, I'm John Siegel. Well, Joel, today we're going to talk about the Florida Derby, the Spiral, but first let's recap the Louisiana Derby. You know, this was the first of the 100-point races. It's an important race, the Louisiana Derby. You know, it's not only because it's $1 million, but there's some good horses in there. You know, we talked last week. Let's see how Gun Runner does in the Louisiana Derby. Joel, he wins the race pretty impressively. What'd you think?
I was impressed with his performance. I mean, I think you know what you're getting from Gun Runner at this point. You know, he's a tactical horse. Once he was able to overcome the one draw, you know, we talked about the pace in the race. There was not a lot of speed lining up in Louisiana Derby, particularly when some of the horses like Battery didn't decide to go. You see him here turning for home. Gun Runner saved all the ground on the inside.
Yep. See
the pace relatively so, 48-1. You know, 112-4. I mean, that's as moderate as you can get for this class of horse. He saved the ground, slipped up, and drew off. What you don't see here is Mohaymen. Corey went back inside with him, got him in trouble again. There was a point at the top of the stretch where he had the opportunity to where he was going to have to fan wide, maybe go around 3 horses, but would have clear run to his destiny and whether or not. I think he felt the pace was too soft. He wanted to take the aggressive route, try to go up the rail with Mohaymen. Got him stopped when the pace setter, you know, started to back up. You know, he had maybe an opportunity to swing to the 2-path and get through. He didn't do that. He tried the rail, got stopped twice, you know, and I'm talking about massive checks, John. This horse lost a ton of ground. I'm not saying I'm dead certain he was going to catch Gun Runner.
Right.
I do think he was going to make a race of it. And you look at Gun Runner, he ran a 90 buyer in the Risen Star. I do think he got maybe a little tired at the end there, had no license to off the layoff. Comes back in the Louisiana Derby, gets an ideal trip. He runs a 91 buyer, so about the same sort of race. Mile and eighth, obviously, with his pedigree is not an issue. However, he's gotten beautiful setups, trained well locally at Fairgrounds. So kudos to Gun Runner. He earns his way into the Derby. We certainly know he has some familiarity with Churchill Downs. He belongs in the race. I still happen to believe Mohaymen is maybe the colt with a lot more upside coming out of that race. But we talked about him. He's kind of got that dollar bill syndrome to where he just keeps finding trouble based on his closing style. And he's a horse that's always going to need that pace setup. And anytime you have a pace-reliant horse that finds trouble like this, you have to be concerned if you're a Mohaymen fan going forward. But I do think, going back to Churchill, I do think here's a horse that, again, has that room for, you know, to continue in the maturing process and be a legitimate Derby candidate. He just had a lot of bad luck to date.
Yeah, and that's something that you don't want going into the Derby, you know, especially if you do need, you know, the pace to set up for you.
Yeah.
If you find trouble, I mean, there's already enough trouble in the Derby trying to navigate your way through there. So,
absolutely.
You know, it's good it looks like he's earned his way in there, but man, he's, you know, how's he going to navigate through that trouble?
Sure.
You know, the other question is Gun Runner. He's done enough now. He's earned his way into the Kentucky Derby, but has he done enough to get his way into the TCI top 10?
You know, I'm not going to put him in the top 10 yet. Again, I think we made a pretty good evaluation on Gun Runner. And again, what you've accomplished up through April, to me, isn't what the TCI top 10 is about. It's about how you're going to project in the classics. That's what our top 10 is made up of, John. So did Gun Runner have a fabulous chance to win the Louisiana Derby? Absolutely. I acknowledge that. I don't think he has a top 10 chance, in my view, of winning the Kentucky Derby. He's one of those horses, I think that, you know, he's so honest that I do think that, you know, mile and a quarter, you look at that pedigree, he could certainly get a piece of it, but I just don't see the ability there yet. And you see it bear out. I mean, he's had great trips and he's running low 90 buyers right now. Certainly he has room for improvement, but for me, he's not currently a top 10 contender when I look at his skill set.
All right, so let's take a look now at the TCI top 10 because there was some movement in there, but it looks like they're all the same horses at this point.
Well, I mean, you know, look, you see it's pretty consistent 1 through 4, and we're going to talk about Mohaymen and Nyquist. They'll face off this weekend. Everybody's looking forward to that. Very exciting showdown there. And we have a bunch of established horses, in my view, in the top 4. In the 5 spot, I'm really bucking a trend here. I've really liked what I've seen from my man Sam in terms of his ability. Again, he's just a maiden winner.
Yeah.
He's going to break all the rules if he turns out to be a legitimate Kentucky Derby contender. And who knows, maybe he runs average in the Wood Memorial, shows his class or maybe even lack of class, and doesn't get into the Derby. So he's a reach right now at the 5 spot. But again, on my list, I love the talent and upside. He moves in that 5 spot for me.
Okay.
Mohaymen had that 5 spot, but for me, again, a horse that just keeps on finding trouble. I'm not down and out on him yet. I still think this is a colt. Matter of fact, the first, half dozen, 7 colts on my list, I would probably draw the line right there and up. I think those horses have the ability to win the Kentucky Derby. They've shown me something at this point, as opposed to 8, 9, and 10. Those are horses that have questionable form right now, questionable class level, and really they're sort of holding on to those spots right now and are going to have to prove something to me in their final preps to hold a spot in the top 10. So you mentioned a horse like Gun Runner, a horse like Outwork from the top Pletcher Barn. I mean, there's a handful of horses I could mention right now. People say, hey, how come that horse isn't in your top 10? Well, really, beyond my top 7, I'm not really sold on anything else. So, I mean, between 8 and 15, is probably a pretty comparable mix of horses.
All right, well, let's talk about this weekend. You mentioned we got the champion, Nyquist, going against Mohaymen, but let's talk about the Spiral first. This is a race that it's synthetic. You've never been super high on the talent level in here, but it is interesting because we see a horse that was on the Derby trail, then they kind of said, we're not sure, now he's back on, and of course I'm talking about Aeroforce. Tell me, what do you think about his chances?
Well, there's no offense to the Spiral. I mean, we've seen Animal Kingdom run well. We've seen Hard Spun come out of this race. Trainer intentions mean so much. In a final prep race for the biggest dirt race of their life, you're not going to see many trainers run a horse on the synthetic. You're just not going to see that.
Sure.
So can a horse come out of here and run well in the Derby? Well, absolutely they can. I mean, Animal King was a long shot and won the Derby and had a turf pedigree, and he just so happened to be a great dirt horse and he won the Kentucky Derby. So it can happen, but the Derby is they're only awarding 50 points for this race. They're treating it as a second round prep, not a final prep.
Sure.
So, I mean, I think that's indicative. You get a full field in here. I mean, you mentioned, we saw there with Aeroforce, John, he is by far the class of this race. I mean, when I look at this field, I mean, I see, just in terms of class, I see Aeroforce, Rallis, a grade 1 winner who, to me, didn't have any excuse last time on the Rebel. He got a great trip and just faded there. So they need to, they're hoping he's going to move up on the synthetic. And then you have Azar, who I think, drew poorly from the Pletcher Barn. He's the 12-hole, but Azar's a horse that's sneaky good in here. He won his only main track race last time out, has a lot of turf form as a 2-year-old. They even ran him in the Breeders' Cup. And I remember Keeneland weekend, he was training as well as any horse in the top Pletcher Barn on the main track. So here's a horse that they've always thought had a ton of ability and actually has a main track pedigree. The fact he likes the turf gives me the indication that he's a synthetic candidate to really appreciate that. And he has some tactical speed, which that should help him overcome that 12 post. So I expect Azar to find a good tactical spot here. We'll see how good he is on the synthetic because I think he has some quality. I want to see Rallis. Can he return to that grade 1 form? And then Aeroforce, again, the first horse that I mentioned here, John. He's a horse that initially was on the TCI top 10 when we had it in mind. Then he ran so poorly in the Lecomte, and it really made you question his ability on the dirt and whether or not he was Derby material. Matter of fact, they took him off the Derby trail. Now they say he's doing well enough. He's back on. He's training on synthetic at OBS. We expect him to be the horse to beat definitely in the Spiral Stakes. So big test for Aeroforce to see if he can get back on track.
All right, well, you mentioned class, in there. Now we're really going to talk about a field that's full of class, and of course I'm talking about the Florida Derby. Joel, this is $1 million purse, but what's exciting is we see our 2-year-old champion, Nyquist, going against the undefeated #1 horse on the TCI top 10 and many other people's #1 horse, and that's Mohaymen. Tell me, do you see this as a 2-horse field, or do you think there's somebody in there that could upset these two?
I think it's a 2-horse field, and I think they're many lengths away from the rest of the field in here. I mean, it's a very odd race in that regard. It's definitely the race of the year so far. We have not seen a race yet in 2016 that has 2 superstars in it like this, going head-to-head. You got the undefeated champion Nyquist going on the road, chasing that bonus, and you got Mohaymen, who's #1 on most people's list, not just ours right now. Exciting young son of Tappet, keeps taking forward steps and just looks like he has endless ability here. So just an exciting showdown between those two. And you have to look at where they drew. Nyquist drawing inside. He has so much tactical speed. You would expect him to be on the lead or just sitting off the lead. The only horse I think that can grab the lead over him is maybe Take It to the Edge, that Dale Roman's maiden that's stretching out from 7 furlongs. He certainly has some speed himself, but I look at this as a match race. I look at Mohaymen. I think the fact that Mohaymen drawing outside of Nyquist, I think Junior Alvarado's instruction is going to be find Nyquist's hip and be attached to it wherever it is.
Sure.
When he goes, you go. And really you have to treat this like a match race. And the thing that concerns me is when I look at these other 8 horses or whatever in the race, really there's only a couple of them. Fellowship in here has hit the board, well back as a closer. take it to the edge. I mentioned his maiden win. He looks like he has some quality. The rest of these horses don't even belong in the stratosphere with Mohaymen and Nyquist. So I'm very interested to see, will any of them have compromised trips? I mean, Mohaymen, his last 2 trips have been rather eventful in my opinion. Now he's overcome them. You know, they've been oddly run races to where he's had odd early positioning within the race. Will he run into trouble here, having to sift through the traffic? That's one thing you never want to see in a big race like this. There's so much buildup about the showdown between Nyquist and Mohaymen. Will you have that incident to where one of these other 8 horses that maybe, frankly, doesn't belong in the race has an adverse effect to one of the other 2 performances that we want to see? So be interested to see. Huge race this weekend. Everybody's looking forward to it. I like Mohaymen.
All right, man, it's going to be good. You know, like you said, it's the two great horses in there. It's the East-West, you know, going against each other. This is the kind of days that I love to do this show and to follow.
Nyquist won't fold. I mean, this will be a stretch battle. You know, one thing I love about it, Kieran McLaughlin says, you know, we embrace this challenge before the Kentucky Derby. It's not ideal. I mean, we talked about this. Will Mohaymen, they could have went to maybe the Bluegrass Stakes and run at Keeneland, but they've embraced this challenge of facing champion Nyquist, even though the biggest race of their life is 5 weeks after in the Kentucky Derby. And a lot of times you don't want to face a challenge like that. They could run each other into the ground the final furlong or 2, run a very fast race and be tough to recover and run your best race in the Derby. So it's a big risk, but you have to love the sportsmanship here with both these horses going for it.
It's going to be exciting. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you come back next week. We'll see if it's the East or the West that take home the Florida Derby.